When someone is asked of their favorite or most personally noted game characters, you'll likely hear of a few very familiar faces. Super Mario, Link and Zelda, Luigi, Joel and Ellie, Kratos, Master Chief, and or Chicken Chaser. But as we trickle further down into gaming's less renowned, though not necessarily less important, we begin to see a number of characters that had their moment and vanished, or has made the odd appearance intermittently over the years in gaming. I've been wondering about a certain someone's place in video game history lately, a persona contrived many years ago from a little studio in the UK. I am referring to one of my favorite characters ever in gaming, Sir Daniel Fortesque. The mere thought of his one-eyed, bone-headed, massively toothed grin always makes me smile, and immediately fills me with a moment from my warehouse of memories associated with the original MediEvil on the original PlayStation. The grimdark setting punctuated with morose yet charming visuals, intoxicating audio cues, and a breathtaking soundtrack brings together what I think is one of the most inviting action experiences of the 1990s. Now I know this intro emanates some sense of bias, and it's going to be difficult for me to keep this totally in check as we continue to discuss the game. But apart from my love for MediEvil as a fan, I do think there's a case to be made for its importance today, as in right now, in 2024. And that is what I would like to explore with you today. So, let's revisit MediEvil and consider why this magical series deserves recognition 26 years later. So this will not be a deep dive into the history of the franchise, as I think many wise and wonderful individuals like Josh Strife and Reliable Rhubarb have done a great job in exploring the origins and growth of Dan's character, fellows, and world. Scour away online to find them if you're interested. I will also not be going in depth with either MediEvil 2 or the Resurrection title for PSP. These might be saved for a future video. That said, I will provide here a quick summary of where MediEvil comes from, given that this is a fan appreciation video, and it's only fair to at least touch on the basics of the series' beginnings. So, where did this 1998 title exactly come from? Well, the idea and development of MediEvil can be traced back to the year of 95, shortly after the release of the PlayStation console. The original title of the game was Dead Man Dan, a game that would combine aspects of Ghosts and Goblins and Tim Burton films. It was also not meant to be an exclusive game to PlayStation, as the original studio, UK-based Millennium Interactive, was designing the game to also release on PC and Sega Saturn. When the team gave Sony a demo of their game's dev progress, they were met with an offer to join Sony as an internal studio. The team accepted and began working closely with Sony Interactive Entertainment. This was a wild, exciting, and nerve-wracking time for game developers, as 3D gaming had barely escaped its infancy. Not only did some games release in a near unplayable state like Bubsy 3D, but many were cancelled, like Gen 13 for PlayStation and Sega Saturn, and Fanzu Furumu, which was supposed to be a console exclusive for the Sega Saturn. There were so many incredible ideas being put to the test of 3D development, but countless fell victim to their ambitions and the sheer difficulty of bringing these games to fruition. It cannot be overstated how remarkable games like Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot were for their time. In fact, Jason Wilson himself had mentioned the latter as a reference for their design, that a chase sequence with the Jabberwocky had been scrapped as a potential level after playing similar levels like Boulder Dash, or levels I assume like Boulder Dash, from Crash, as it, quote, didn't add much value to the gameplay, end quote. But back on track. The point is that executing a working camera, motion controls, impact within animations, and so on were very difficult to compose together in a time when very little of it existed prior. Basically, the team behind MediEvil had their work cut out for them, and were working within the very bosom of gaming innovation. I know that sounds a bit extreme, but as touched on, there wasn't much of a blueprint for how to design an action game beyond 2 dimensions. Chris Sorrell, Jason Wilson, and their entire team were largely on their own to decipher ways in which the world of MediEvil could come alive as a 3D gaming experience. It goes without saying already, I'm sure, that I'm beyond grateful they were successful. So that's a bit of background on the world to come in MediEvil, but what about the world within the game itself? This is where we actually get to see the charm and wonder that is at the heart of this series. It begins within the Crypt of Dan and progresses slowly within a few levels that are not too far apart from one another in a regional context, though distinct enough in form. The graveyard is an excellent introduction to how one roams through the semi-linear vistas dotted around Gallowmere, providing a clear path to traverse, usually, in attending the level's exit, allowing you to continue on. There's variations even on this notion, such as the Gallows Gauntlet, which provides 2 exits in case you're missing a key item to continue. As you make your way to the level's exit, you'll encounter some form of adversary serving both to provide a challenge to your venture, like most action games, but also to function as an interesting mechanic to how you become increasingly powerful yourself. Enemies defeated yield souls, which when combined to reach 100% will beckon you to a little place called the Hall of Heroes once you leave the level. There is also treasure, chests with clubs or shields, and sometimes a life bottle to be found as you examine crevices and semi-conspicuous avenues and alleys practically begging you to explore. Even knowing where just about every pickup is through subsequent playthroughs, this is still a sheer joy for me to experience. But moving on from the graveyard comes the Hilltop Mausoleum, which produces the same zombies as before, but also introduces a new enemy, and a sense of verticality to your purpose here, with gargoyles perpetually hawking boulders at you while you navigate upwards to the hill's apex. There is also a hidden area which introduces the player and how it rewards someone who leaves no stone unturned, and this further introduces the interconnectedness of some levels in reading up on facts about Gallowmere, and the key items to be used in other regions you discover during your adventure. Next, inside the church itself, with another new enemy type and fittingly ominous soundtrack. Here, floors collapse, gremlins steal your weapons, and your first boss fight awaits before grabbing the key you need to continue. Return to the Graveyard has you backtrack a portion of the original level before having to build a line of platforms to proceed, with another boss, or bosses I guess, to challenge you prior to moving on with a new dash ability. It is here where MediEvil really begins to surprise and I think impress with its breadth of imagination within the abundance of unique gimmicks you will come across in future levels. The gargoyle provides for you a sense of freedom to come in venturing onward as you please, within a much wider variety of levels to challenge you, each with their own set of gimmicks, puzzles, and enemies to overcome. I will not go over all of them in this video, but here are a few. You will be shrunken to the size of an insect within an anthill, duking it out with pumpkins, including a grotesquely large one, navigating a maze solving riddles, battling through a gauntlet set in an asylum, setting off a volcano, playing with time machinations, and even making your way across a ghost pirate ship that you just happened to stumble upon. Spoiler, you're not welcome on it. Each of these levels, and then some, provides very specific style nuances you need to work with as Dan in order to complete the stage, which is something that works both for and against MediEvil. Some of these challenges, such as guiding a mouse to an elephant while trying to avoid feline predators, has been notoriously off-putting for many players, while others such as exploring an entire village to search out items that you may be given access to a manor is something many of us are fond of to this day. There's no way around it in MediEvil. You will find minigames and challenges that annoy you to pieces, but then experience others that will fill you with a sense of cheer and joy, maybe leaving you to think, who comes up with this? So, you take the good with the bad, and for me that's okay. Even games today widely regarded as masterpieces like Super Mario 64 have star missions and even entire levels I dread repeating. But, as with MediEvil, the strengths within other parts of the game make the struggle totally worth it. The level design in MediEvil is as quirky as Dan himself. As described earlier with some of the challenges the player can expect, you will experience one surprise after another. No two levels are alike, even if aesthetically they bear similarities. MediEvil is a game of gimmicks. That is, each region you explore will have you work with a melting pot of ideas in order to succeed that may not have been in the previous region, or the one to come afterwards. Let's consider again the first few levels after you leave Dan's crypt. The Graveyard welcomes you with a general idea of what to expect in a given level. Enemies, runes, collectibles, and of course, its own set of gimmicks. In this case, you have a stone angel in which you can redirect its gaze in order to open a corresponding gate. It's not exactly a complicated mechanism, and first-time players will no doubt catch on to this function within a few roam-arounds, but it's a gentle invitation into the wider world of Dan's adventure. Then you hit the hilltop, where the main goal is to move onwards and upwards. There are, interestingly, no runes to be had here like the previous level, and boasts a secret area that feels so rewarding to uncover your first time through. This will be a centerpiece of Gallowmere, where discovery of items or even a chalice yields to the player the joy of unfolding something from further exploring the world itself. The game is not kidding when it tells you that it's full of things to find, fittingly after having found a well-hidden shore piece from riding a coffin down the river. So if you felt a sense of achievement in uncovering these rooms below the hill, wow, are you ever in for a treat. The lighting too is also worth mentioning. This, I confess, might be beyond me and is anecdotal, but I don't recall too many games using these dark yet brightly contrasted portions so well. Dan stands out like a perfectly juxtaposed buffoon against the undead and monsters trying to overcome him, and is a delightful visual to this day. A shout out to Ocean Interactive for bringing this out so well in their remake of the original game. We also cannot talk about MediEvil without remarking on the audio. Bob and Barnes wrote the pieces together with a gothic overcast of sound movements that reach within each level in near pitch-perfect fashion. Despite being electronically synthesized music, it leaves little to the imagination what instrumentation is taking place throughout the piece, which I think is a testament to the strong writing of the soundtrack. You'll know what the strings are as they weave away while you traverse rows of graves, the windwork of something akin to a clarinet while you strut forward, bombastic flexes of brass during combat, and the spellbinding chimes that totally immerse you apart from anything other than Enchanted Forest or Sleeping Village in that moment. I would certainly argue a few levels weren't best suited to the related tracks, and for even more music to have been added to the soundtrack had time allowed. But the music still remains a core component of my love for the series, and I kid you not, but the OST for the games are on Spotify, which I find myself listening to once in a while when walking in a park or enjoying the finer things in life like coffee or writing a really bad poem. Go give them a listen, if you will. And now for Dan, the man himself. The endlessly charming and light-hearted protagonist needs no introduction. Okay, maybe he does. But let's quickly talk about the word hero, as the developers took care to construct Dan with turning some conventional notions on their head. The traditional hero archetype is an individual who is born out of an ordinary background, usually an average folk, who through a variety of circumstances find themselves in a situation that forces their life into a new ordeal, a set of ventures to overcome that may range from Herculean tasks like slaying dragons, to maybe just dealing with resolving conflicts within impending relationships. If I mention the names Superman, Batman, or Frasier Crane, you likely get an idea of someone both visually and morally similar to that of another's view in respect to their experience with their episodes and development arcs. These characters become embedded in our understanding of self, that vicariously through these fictional personas we begin to see a part of ourselves and what we wish to see in the world through their own efforts and achievements. That is the power of a hero archetype. You and I can come together for coffee, bring up a moment from literature or time in which one of these protagonists were engaging some issue to overcome, and we may bond over what the result was just as our fellow being might centuries ago, sharing stories of epic tales over a campfire. Video games have a mysterious way of uniting us, and it's this notion which most interests me about gaming as a medium. It has a way of bringing us together, harmoniously, when we wax poetic about Mario's disarming smile, the awe-inspiring scale of Shadow of the Colossus, and the bewildering yet insightful freedom to flatulate around others in Fable.
What's afoot then?
So, returning to Dan, the hero of Gallowmere who fell at a single arrow to the eye. He's not quite a hero as we would find in a classic tale, the idea of a pure-hearted being acting on such ideals, coming out on top after a series of struggles nobly persevered. Rather, he's something in between that and of an anti-hero. More accurately though, he's a sort of accidental hero, as Chris Sorrell put it in the short doc MediEvil's Minds. Someone with good motives, but with a mixed past now being given another opportunity at redemption by sheer chance. There's certainly nothing malevolent about him, but we're given bite-sized indications throughout the game that his life was largely sustained with the treatment of a silver spoon. In short, he was a spoiled brat padded with the greatest of privileges compared to his heroic counterparts, and elevated himself upon Peregrine's social ladder out of luck and a favorable reputation. If the story ended at his death on the battlefield where he was felled, we'd have a tale comparable to that of Goethe's Werther. We are granted, instead, as players, the experience of his redemption to its end from its very beginning. Everything we come to connect with Dan occurs either through the remarks others cast on him or within the gameplay itself. I mentioned Hall of Heroes earlier without elaborating, so let's take a quick trip there now. Dan himself offers very little in dialogue, and this is clever on the studio for doing. We are more easily able to feel ourselves in Dan's shoes through this approach, and receive Canny Tim's lauding and Woden's discontent as though we were being addressed ourselves. He becomes a vessel for the game's writing when interacting with another, imbuing us with emotion and a realization that Dan is not exactly well loved in the world he's returned to. But as with his first words to the gargoyles upon his timely revival, we become a part of his redemption arc. Normally in fiction, this would come later in the story after a sense of failure or a crucial mistake leading to some form of loss. But the failure is expressed to us within the first cinematic and through various tomes around Gallowmere regarding his past afterwards, as well as the hero statues themselves. As soon as we begin controlling Dan, the redemption arc has begun, and the entire point of MediEvil, literally speaking, is being able to become a part of his triumph as a player. The Hall of Heroes then acts as both a respite for reward, but also another page turned into the past of Dan while glimpsing into his impending redemption should we continue to stick with him to the end. There is also the gameplay itself, which extends to us Dan's persona simply by how he plays. He's a goof, and it's so lovable. We live in a world replete with games that provide impact and connection through the struggle of characters we play, such as Final Fantasy, Xenoblade, and The Last of Us, just to name a few. Their place in gaming is invaluable, and I love them all, but there is more to life than introspection and subject matter that involves the kind of feeling evoked when playing something as sense-provoking as these. Dan, to me, is a refreshing release from some of the heavier content we experience in more emotion-driven narratives, a therapeutic joy for players searching for something a little less serious. He's boisterous in his movements, his sprint expressive, and exaggerated to comic effect, while hacking away at a line of zombies with hilarious speed. He hoops with every hop, and bonks his head, eliciting his, pun intended, boneheaded self. I find more amusing now today when playing something like Dark Souls or Monster Hunter was required to wield something gargantuan and how much goes into each animation, and then contrasting that to Dan's effortless power swings with something of similar size, to the player's hilarity and satisfaction. I mention other games and series for this reason, as we've come such a long way within so many wonderful franchises where combat is refined to the point of genuine artistry. Whenever I consider those against the gameplay of MediEvil, it's as though I'm comparing something akin to Polanski's Macbeth against, say, Monty Python's Holy Grail. It comes down to this for me, that Dan in the game as a whole is not about being taken so seriously because it does not take itself seriously. It's not like Kratos and his son trying to forge a loving bond in spite of his past. It's not about Noah and his gang ruminating on their nature and mortality. Again, a place for all of these. It's a tale of redemption, with a twist of humor, parody, and absurdism boiled together in a pot of what I think is one of the most pleasurable comedies a person can enjoy in this space. Dan is both complex and straightforward as a protagonist. His past is left for us to discover all around Gallowmere, and as mentioned before, it's not very flattering, especially if we're to take the Hall of Heroes as the main source for his inner workings before returning to his undead-riddled kingdom. Most who knew him are acidic in discovering he's now running around trying to save the world as a hero would, often reluctantly handing over their weapon in his efforts to do so. The complexity really only exists if you allow it, as I suppose it would for any video game. You could play Dan while skipping anything remotely related to the story or background of the world. I wouldn't judge anyone if this was their playstyle, though I think it's uncontroversial to say that the reward of noticing various texts and comments within Gallowmere is really its own reward. It elevates your connection to Dan's nature and his struggle to achieve what was taken for granted in his past life. A second chance, as is said at the beginning of the game, something any one of us in the real world crave after our own sense of failure in life. This is where, perhaps, it becomes a more serious matter for me, personally speaking, as I can't help but relate my own struggles in life with Dan's attempts to do so in his fictional set piece. I will not go into detail with that here, but I'll say this: I often draw strength from literature, music, and yes, even games like MediEvil for perspective on my own affairs in life when I feel discouraged with the memory of times that felt truly hopeless. It is here that I would ask the viewer if they have their own anchors within the arts and humanities that grant them buoyancy during difficult and even hopeless times in their life. It's actually kind of a trick question. You do. It's something we all uncover over time with wisdom accrued in honest living, authenticity in action, and perseverance in keeping our head high against the odds. MediEvil is the game that has been there for me, a form of therapy and catharsis through said times, and is special to me for that alone. I could never put a price tag on the series because it means that much. Flaws be damned, it can honestly provide a sense of peace when I need it. Before I sound too obsessive, let me be clear that I draw this peace from many sources. Sometimes it's not even media at all, but rather meditation, or even calling a good friend. Life in balance is a life well lived, I believe. But I felt a connection with the character of Dan as someone who reminds me not to consider myself so much, to plow forward with a healthy carelessness while not masquerading in self-denying narcissism, but with the cheer of a mission known and with the consideration of the world at large before myself. Dan's character yields this to me as a player since the series' inception, and is a rock in my passion as a gamer. As I said earlier, video game archetypes have that power. Thank goodness for that. What about today though, and what lies ahead for this series? Friendly reminder, it's the year 2024 and there is a lot going on in this industry right now. The overall consensus, at least online, seems to be one of compelling discontent. Too many games as a service, too much development time, the cost for major titles, console exclusives in particular, mass layoffs, and on the list goes. Perhaps I'll say my piece about all this in the future, but it's rather MediEvil's future I'm most interested in at the moment. We spent time talking in detail about the original title, but as fans know, there exist other projects, notably a sequel set in Victorian London, which we call MediEvil 2, and a reimagining of the original for the PlayStation Portable, Resurrection. We've also received a remake from Other Ocean Interactive, and that's really about it. Seems to have stopped there, no? I don't think so. And to clarify, this is speculative on my part. But I don't think Sony has thrown in the towel yet. Hopefully they never do. The most recent action Sony took in any form that wasn't a rumor was the release for the original game on the digital storefront or as an option to play with a subscription in their premium tier. This may not mean much, of course, as Ape Escape and other beloved titles have shown up as well with zero indication from PlayStation that they're giving it new life. However, we did receive the remake as mentioned. The sales numbers are hard to pin, but it did not hit the 1 million mark at this time and almost certainly never will. Sean Layden and other leaders of the past understood that sales of a game doesn't exist in a vacuum and are able to further attract consumption of other goods within the same product's ecosystem. So when a remake like MediEvil from 2019 doesn't sell millions, it's not necessarily seen as a business failure. Here's some food for thought, as I don't think these low sales, at least relative to other Sony properties, demonstrate a lack of interest in Dan's future. Why not a remake of Resistance? Why not the Jack trilogy? SOCOM? Or a remake of Going Commando and up your arsenal after the success of the first Ratchet & Clank reimagining? Understandably, they were not all massive sellers, but the Jak and Daxter series, for example, another love of mine, sold millions in its lifetime and has a very committed fan base to this day. And yet in the absence of what Sony Interactive Entertainment could have committed to for a rework of a retro title, they chose MediEvil. Why? I think Dan is being gauged. Sony is wise enough to know a remake of such an old title that has not aged too well would not resonate with a mass of new consumers and the upcoming generation. For all we know, it could have been a project to help appease fans within their current portfolio of titles that don't contain many games like it, which on its own has merits. Sony, like Microsoft and Nintendo, are perpetually considering their catalog and how their buyers connect with these titles. I think they know Dan has something, a world of gothic aesthetic that continues to be desired in gaming, exuding humor, because who doesn't love that, and game mechanics that are simple, creative, and approachable to anyone who tries. When was the last time any of us really played anything like MediEvil outside of MediEvil? Its uniqueness is a defining feature, and it could honestly be a matter of finding the right team to continue Dan's legacy. Yeah, I'm actually kind of hinting at another sequel. Do I think it will happen? Almost certainly no. But the remake we last received really is the elephant in the room, something I continue to scratch my head over. At the least, is a MediEvil 2 remake in the works under our noses. I remember before the last State of Play about a rumor that it was quietly being made and that it would drop this year. Oh, how sad I was when I heard it was a fib. However, there have been rumblings again about another show that Sony is planning in conjunction with the PS5 Pro hardware, their worst-kept secret. If we get a presentation, perhaps something there. Who knows? Not to mention that a show or some cinematic experience for MediEvil is in the works as well. We also don't have access to MediEvil 2 on the modern PlayStation console, yet we have Resurrection and the first game. No doubt that should grace our presence soon to be enjoyed by its fans and newcomers once more. A few things are in the air for the series, and so it's ultimately why I remain unconvinced that it's over for our boy Dan. We'll just have to wait and see. But hey, at the very least, we'll see him again soon in Astrobot. It releases in less than 2 weeks at the time of rating, and it's the most I've been excited for a game since Elden Ring. Perhaps that can tide us over until we learn more about the future of Fortesque. Let us conclude our journey here. A fan such as myself could ramble endlessly about their adoration for this series. Kirby fans could gush ad infinitum about the puffball's impact on their lives, and heck, I bet there are lots of Blinks fans out there who cherish the cat's adventures within their hearts, resting as an anchor embedded into the sands of their very being.
We're gamers. We don't always make sense at first glance, even to one another. But I love how we can make a case with one another about a character that punctuates such joy and meaning into our lives. Surely we don't always agree, we're a stubborn bunch, but nonetheless respect our companion's perspective on having felt an embrace of sorts through the artistry experienced. When it comes to MediEvil and its chief icon, I don't look to convince anyone that they should experience Dan the way you or someone else might have felt, but to explain to the best of my ability why this seemingly neglected series left its mark on us as fans in such a profound way. MediEvil through Daniel Fortesque is an experience of hero fantasy turned on its one-eyed lopsided head, crafted together in the fires of imagination and joy. It's a labor of love from a team that took a chance on a new idea, having left a gem in our industry even in spite of the titans that now reign within the iconography of gaming's most renowned, shadowing the Undead Knight's presence beneath their fame, though to no effect on his impact among those of us who still love him today. 26 years later, the charm is not lost, but rather more nourished with every playthrough made, and stands today, I believe, as a series worth savoring.